What you guys, welcome to part 2 on how to troubleshoot a PC that keeps crashing. This was my PC that kept crashing, and we're moving on to part 2, which is now replacing the cooler. I had an all-in-one cooling system on here, and you can check out the previous video on how to fix a PC that keeps crashing, and this one is the continued obviously troubleshooting of that video. Now, a lot of people in the comment section had their own theories on what it could be, and the only way to know really 100% is to actually troubleshoot properly and test every component on the computer. That way you'll know exactly what it is, because assuming what you think you know it is not good enough. So I'm just quickly going to check to see whether this cooler will fit on this little ITX board here, and I can see there is enough room for a fan. Here's the actual fan here. These are quite nice little fans, nice little cooler. This Dark Rock Pro 2, I think this is called, and pretty decent little cooler. I'm really not interested in what the cooler is. I'm just interested in to find out whether the water cooler let go. So you see we have the Pure Wings 2 on this one. They did have an RGB version, but I couldn't get my hands on that one because I had to wait. So I went with this one instead. And we're going to go ahead and get this installed on the PC. Now, it does come with Intel and also AMD fixings here, and it does support DDR5. Now, I don't have any spare RAM or any spare CPUs or motherboards for DDR5, and that's what's made it a little bit more difficult to troubleshoot here. So I'm having to improvise. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on here. These are the little spacers. You basically just push these over the actual fittings on the board here. Now, there's no backplate on this one. It uses the stock backplate for this particular board. So I'll just push these on. And once these are in position, I'll be able to then screw the actual bracket onto there. So this is the bracket. I've added the screws in, and all you need to do is screw this basically into these fittings here, and you should be good to go. So it's 2 screws, a very easy setup mechanism on this one. Not really difficult. As you can see, there's not a lot of room in this one because it is quite a small motherboard. It's an ITX motherboard, and I'm hoping the CPU and the motherboard are not damaged. Now, it's quite difficult to troubleshoot some intermittent issues, and this is what this problem is. It's an intermittent problem that keeps crashing, and it's hard to know exactly where to pinpoint it. So you need to test every item here. I'm just going to quickly screw down these 2 screws, and once these are screwed down, I'll reverse this and do the other bracket as well, and then we can mount the actual cooler and get to some testing. Now, if you haven't watched the previous troubleshooting video on this, then by all means go and check that out. I'll try and leave a link in this video description for this one, and I'll do the vice versa with the other video so people can actually keep track of it. So I'm just going to put this little bracket on here, and then we're going to mount this onto the CPU here, and then screw down the 2 screws here. It's a bit tight, but it should be okay. And I'm going to go ahead and just line this up here, and then we can go ahead and put the screws in. Now I'm going to just quickly tighten these 2 screws down, and then we can attach the fan to the actual cooler. Now, after great consideration, I really didn't want to disturb all of the cable management and all of this sort of work that I put in to build this machine, but it comes to a point where you're going to have to remove the boards so I can get access to the drive on the back of the motherboard. And again, I really want to test this properly. So I've got this in here, and I'm going to probably remove everything from the actual case and get it onto the bench. So it's a bit of a faff, but I'm going to have to do it because at the end of the day, there's cables everywhere now. It's starting to get a bit messy. I really want to test this power supply as well because I did use a power supply tester, but I never really swapped out the power supply to test. I did order one, and I was waiting for that to be delivered. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unplug everything and take it all out. I think this is going to be the best route to test all of this stuff because I'm going to have to test things out. Now, I didn't have another power supply powerful enough to drive these bigger cards here, and I've only got a 550 watt power supply. But what I'm going to do is we'll improvise, and I'll try and do my best to make things work. So let's go ahead and get this card out of here. You can see it's quite tight because the case is quite a small case, and the airflow in this case was not the greatest, to be honest with you. So this is a 2070 Super. I did swap it out for the 4070 Ti, which I have thoroughly tested, and there's nothing wrong with the card whatsoever. So I do want to remove and replace this driver as well, and change the drive, so we can change to see if that's a drive issue, and also want to change the one on the back and unplug that just to make sure that's not causing an issue. So let's go ahead and unscrew the motherboard here. It's just 4 screws. It won't take long. I don't know why I didn't do this in the first place. Probably been a bit lazy. But now we're committed. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this and do it the way I should have done in the very first place. Now, one thing I will say is never assume anything. Always test and then test some more, because intermittent issues can be really troublesome and really difficult to track down. And the reason why is because a lot of stuff that you test in is, if you use a power supply tester, it may lead you into thinking that the power supply is good, and it might not be, and you need to swap that out and test. Same thing with drives. We can quickly test these. I'm just going to quickly remove this bottom drive here, because I really wanted to get access to this so I can test this. I'm not happy with this in this position here. I had to leave that sticky pad on here, and I can't put a heatsink on here because it doesn't fit in the case and it touches the bottom of the case. So what I'm going to do is remove these and test these thoroughly to make sure they're working perfectly fine. That way we can put the drives to bed and make sure we know that they're working okay. So I'll put these to one side for now, and we'll test these on the computer in a minute, and I'll put these into an enclosure, and we can quickly check the smart readings on these to see whether they're working and functioning okay. I've investigated the motherboard. Everything looks okay. It doesn't look like there's any burning or any major issues. That doesn't necessarily mean that the board isn't failing, and you can look closely here and you can see whether there's any marks on here, and there is no marks. So I know the board is looking okay. Doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't failed. Now, the quickest and easiest way to test hardware is to swap it out with known good hardware. And that way, if the problem goes away, you know you've just found your culprit, which is the hardware that you've removed. In this case, I don't have any parts to swap out. So we're going to use this little external caddy to test the drives quickly. Now, you may be thinking, why didn't I just boot up the machine and test them inside this? Because it was randomly crashing and it was having issues. I couldn't do much with it. And I want to make sure that we're getting to the point of we know exactly what is actually causing the problem. So let me go ahead and unscrew this caddy here for this drive, and we'll put it in here, and I'll quickly plug it into my other machine, and we can quickly test this. These are really simple, easy devices to pick up. They're pretty foldable. You just slot the drive in here, and it's a great way of troubleshooting and testing a drive to make sure it's working okay. Also, it's a great way of getting your data off of the drive if you don't have a system where you can plug this into. So what we're going to do is just put it into this external enclosure here, and then we'll basically plug it in to the machine. I'll quickly finish this off, and I'll take it over to the other machine, plug it in. I'm going to test both of these drives here, and we can then see what is going on. So let's have a look here at the first drive here. You can see all the drives here are in good working order. And we got the smart readout here for this particular drive, which is a 4 terabyte drive. This is a NVMe drive here, working perfectly fine. No issues on here. I'm not going to spend too much time doing any more extensive testing on here, because normally the smart readout will give you a good inkling that that drive is failing. And the drive seems to be functioning perfectly fine. Temperatures are good, and also the health status is good. So I can safely say that that drive is working okay. I've just swapped the drives over now, and I'm going to quickly check the other drive, which is the Western Digital Black drive here, and we'll quickly test to see if this drive is working fine. Now, if this drive is failing, then we'll know that it was a drive issue that was causing the problem, which is very unlikely, but I just want to make sure I cover all bases here. And you can see the drive is perfectly fine, 100% in good health. Temperatures are all working good, no errors on the drive whatsoever, so that's good. And that is both the smart readouts. Now, what I'm going to do here is I've got the drive back in here. I'm going to put the heatsink back on in a second. And also what I'm going to do is I've tried to install Windows on another NVMe drive here. And we can plug it into here if we wanted to. But I've got another power supply here. It's a TX550M. And we're going to be using another graphics card in here because it's small and it doesn't require any power. I can just quickly slot it into here, and it should sit on the desk pretty easily. But I will put a bigger card in to put the power supply under load, and I'll get the other power supply out and test this. The good thing about this is it's got a CPU on here and a 24 pin. We can just plug this straight in. We don't have to add any cables here. As you can see, we've got a semi-modular power supply here. So we're going to use these, and we've got a GTX 1030 here. It doesn't require any power. Not interested in the performance or anything like that. I'm just interested in getting the PC to work so I can test it. Now, obviously, I can't put an RTX 4070 Ti on that 550. It might not be enough power to deliver that card, and I don't really want to test it on that, but I will probably put the 1000-watt power supply on here to thoroughly test after this. So I'm going to plug in the 24 pin and the CPU one into the motherboard. I've got the RAM installed on here, and I've also got the drive installed. It's a bit fiddly because you're outside of the computer, and all I need to do is plug this in like so, and that should sit on the desk like so, and then we can start to do some testing. So what I'll do now is I'll boot this up, and what we'll do is we'll get this to the actual desktop and we'll run some tests. And if it crashes, then we know that we've got some sort of issue with the CPU or with the motherboard, because we've now replaced the power supply as well, and we've took that out of the equation. The graphics card's out of the equation as well because we're using a separate graphics card, and I know this works because I've pulled it out of a working machine. So let's go ahead and we're going to power this on. Got the GPU cable in here, got Ethernet inside here, and I've got the CPU cable in here, and the 24 pin, the RAM's inserted, and also the NVMe drive. So let's go ahead and power this up. And what I'm going to do is leave both sticks in here first, get a screwdriver and short the 2 pins, and this will help fire up the actual machine here. You can see the little flash of light, and that was the RGB. And now we've got power going to the power supply. So let's go ahead and let that boot up. Okay, so let's go to the desktop now. I'll capture the screen and I'll show you. We're going to run some benchmarks and some testing software here. This is CPU-Z, and we're going to run the benchmark here and do the stress test of the CPU. Now, I will run Prime 95 as well, but I just want to get this started to see whether this crashes. There was no crashing during that time of testing, so I'm going to put the Expo back on and enable this feature here, and this might be causing the problem. So I did enable it and did disable it. I've tried both ways, but I'm going to go ahead and enable this feature now, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to run the test once more. Now, I'm running it longer than what I'm showing you here. I'm basically leaving this for a good 10-15 minutes to see whether we've got any issues. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run this test again, and I've run these extensively for about 10 or 15 minutes, but what I'm going to do is skip through these and just show you exactly the process I did to get to where we're getting to right now, just to capture this on video. Next, I'm going to run Heaven Benchmark. Because we've only got a 1030 in here, I'm not going to run any other sort of benchmark software because it won't run correctly with this GPU. You can see a bit of tearing going on, and this is because it's only a GTX 1030. But I'm not interested in performance here. I'm just interested to see whether we crash or whether we get any problems. And you can see it went right away through that benchmark with no crashing. Next up, we're going to run Prime 95 to see whether we can get this to replicate the same issues that we had before where it was crashing. So let's go ahead and do some stress testing here. We're going to do a mixed blend of memory and also the actual CPU here, and this is going to put it through its paces, and we'll see whether it crashes. Now, I'm pretty sure that if we had an issue and we was doing this, because when I was rendering a video, it was crashing. So I'm pretty sure this will crash it if there was something wrong. So let's go ahead and click OK here, and we'll run this test here, and then we can monitor exactly what's going on. So click OK, and we'll let the test run. It's now running, and this is going to push the temperatures up on the CPU. We've got Expo running on here as well, so the memory profile is running, and we're also running the actual Prime 95 here now, and it is running on memory and CPU. You'll see here when I open up HW Info, you'll see that there is a sort of sign that it says that it's maxing out the memory, and it's also maxing out the CPU. I'll quickly show you here so you get an idea of what you're looking at here. You can see physical memory load, and it's at 100% here. So if there was an issue with that memory, I'm pretty sure that would now start to show itself like it was before when I was rendering videos, and also when I was doing just normal stuff on the PC, like starting a game, it was crashing. Where we've run benchmarks on here, and we've also run Prime 95 and other software. Coming down here, I'm just going to quickly look here at some of the other results. We're not getting any thermal throttling, and this is a pretty good sign. So we've got all the stock settings on here. Don't worry about the temperatures. That is normal for the Ryzen processor. I will undervolt it and test it on the undervolting to see whether we can replicate that same issue that we had on the system before. So let's move on to the next stage, which is enabling the undervolt on this to try to see whether we can replicate the same issue that we had before. So I'm going to go into BIOS and make some changes and undervolt this CPU. I won't bore you with the whole process, but I'm just going to go in here and put this in manual mode and put in a number here to lower the voltage down, because it's at 1.456 volts here, and I don't really want to be running it at that sort of voltage. So I will lower this, maybe put it at 1.20 volts, and we'll try that and we'll see what we get with the results and see if we can replicate that same problem. So let's go ahead and put this figure in here, and we'll save these settings, and then we'll run some tests and see whether we get any crashing. So I'm going to go ahead and save these and then run Prime 95 again, and we'll test this and see whether we get the same issue coming up. Now, at the moment, it's not crashed, as you've noticed. Now, you may be thinking it must have been the power supply. It could be, and that's what you've got to say to yourself. You're actually testing loads of different things, and we haven't fully tested that 1000-watt power supply yet and put it under its load on the bench. And I may even do that just to see whether that is okay, because I did run an actual power supply tester, which aren't 100% accurate, but I do like to thoroughly test everything to make sure, so I don't go wasting money on expensive parts when they don't need to be purchased because they're working perfectly fine. You can see we're not getting any crashing here, and I will leave this running for say 10 or 15 minutes to see whether we get any problems. And again, we had no issues with crashing while under this load with the undervolted settings. So I think what we'll do next is we'll run a rendering of a video to see whether we get the same problem coming up. Now, I can tell you right now that when I was running a rendering on this same program on this machine, it would not get through the full render, and it would crash and I'd get a blue screen. And that's exactly what was happening, and that was causing me a load of issues, and this is what started the whole process off. Now, I have actually run this all the way through and I didn't get any crashing whatsoever, and I've run it a few different times. And now remember, we've run multiple different tests by now, and the only difference is the unit is out of the PC, and we've changed the GPU and we've changed the cooling on the actual system. So bear that in mind, and you can work out what you think it is so far. I'm going to quickly run Cinebench here and give this a thorough test. Now, you may be thinking, you don't need to do all of this testing. Well, when you've got intermittent issues, you're trying to replicate the same problem. You can see the rendering completely finished and we had no problems there. That was a 30-minute video. We had that rendering out, no issue. So let me quickly do another test here. I'm going to close this off and we'll run Cinebench, and we'll see what we get with Cinebench on the undervolted version of CPU. So I'll let this run and we'll accept the terms and conditions here, and we'll go through this. Now, again, if we had an issue with a CPU, you would think this would crash because this is a CPU intensive test we're doing here. And again, I'm pretty sure if there was an issue, it would crash. So we'll let this run. And this is what happens when you assume what you think you know the answer is without testing. It's important that you test every item on that computer and make sure you're testing every component, because you're trying to make the problem reoccur and show itself. And with intermittent problems, they can sort of take a bit of time before they show themselves. And as you can see, we've run multiple different tests here and we're still not getting any crashing anymore. So something has changed, which is the power supply has changed and the cooler has changed, and the case is not inside that case anymore, where heat builds up quite a bit and it wasn't breathing through that mesh thing. If you've watched the first video, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So what we're going to do here is let this finish, and there again, it's now completed its task without crashing, and that was on an undervolted CPU. So I'm going to go back and put the settings back, and what I'm going to do here, just to find out whether this power supply was the culprit, is we've pulled this out of the machine now, and I'm going to now swap this over and put this 1000-watt power supply back in to the equation, and put basically a bigger graphics card on this as well, so we can draw some power from that power supply to make sure we're thoroughly testing to make sure that power supply is known good. I've got a suspicion that the power supply was okay from the offset, but some people had some concerns in the comments saying they think the power supply was bad. And again, after so many years, you sort of get a gut feeling with some of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thoroughly test it just to make sure. I've got a 2070 Super on here, and we've got this plugged in. Got some cables plugged in here drawing power, and that should be enough to replicate the same problem, because exactly we've got the same power supply in here. Now the only thing that's now changed is obviously the GPU, which I know is good on the machine, the RTX 4070. You see me test that in the other video, and we're also changed the cooler. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back into the settings here, and I'm going to quickly go to AI Tweaker here, leaving the Expo on, and we're just going to turn this back to auto and leave it as stock settings. And what we're going to do here is run Cinebench, and we'll see whether we get the same problem coming up here. So let me go ahead and run Cinebench without the undervolt, and also with that GPU in there, and also now we've got the power supply from the last machine here. So let's run this, and I'm pretty sure now that this would have crashed because it was crashing before when I was rendering videos. So we'll let this run through and we'll see what the end results are. And it's intermittent issues like this can have you running around in circles and chasing your tail, because these types of issues sometimes can really sort of confuse you. 1 minute you're thinking it's the memory, then you're thinking it's the motherboard, and then you're thinking it's the CPU. But assuming, as I've said before, is not the answer. You need to test every component to make sure 100% that it's not any of those components. So we're now whittling down, and we'll let that go through, and you can see it went all the way through. And we're going to run Prime 95 on this system now as well, and this will do the memory and the CPU while we have that power supply in situ. And again, I don't think this would have got through the test before, because when I was rendering a video it used to crash. I will render another video, the same video, and see whether this crashes. So let's go ahead and let this run, and we'll come back when this is done. And now let's quickly render out a video here, and we'll test the same video that was crashing the machine before, and hopefully once we get to the end of this we'll find out whether this crashed. And I can safely say that it never crashed, and it got all the way to the very end and the video was perfectly fine. So this problem seems to have gone away. Now we've got it out of the case, and now we're running a full test. You can see here right near the end the video was perfectly fine. Now we've done loads of testing on this system so far, and by now this would have had major problems, and of course the problems are now gone away, and we're using the 1000-watt power supply. So I'm safely saying that the power supply is perfectly fine, and we now know that it's more than likely due to the case, the heat inside that case, and also the actual water cooler that was actually quite dry around the CPU, which actually led to the fact that thinking it was a CPU related issue, because the blue screen dump files were actually leading towards that, and also it was leading towards memory issues as well. But again, PCs have had an habit of causing major problems, and it's very hard to track these down, and this is the culprit here, I think, that's caused it, and the temperatures, and maybe that case is just too small for the setup. Anyway, I think that's going to be about it. That's what I'm calling it. Let me know in the comment section below what you think it is. I'll be happy to read your comments. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Catch you in the next one. Bye for now.